Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
You've been asking me for a cut the clutter on RCEP or Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership for some time, and I've been promising it to you. Now, the reason I've sort of dragged on and delayed it, as you can guess probably, is that there's been a bit of diffidence on my part. And if you've guessed that, you've guessed right, you're smart. When does that diffidence come in? That diffidence comes in when I'm not so confident about my knowledge in a domain. So what that means is not that I should duck that subject, because the whole idea of cut the clutter is to deal with complexities, but to give myself a little more time with the help of my really smart and fine colleagues to understand those issues and to also see what meaning can be drawn from there. And very often you also find that I come with a take which looks unconventional. In this case, that is what you should be prepared for today, because I will give you a take that is unconventional. So please hang on, because you may or may not agree with me, but you will certainly find it provocative. This will provoke discussion and debate, which is also one of our purposes and also our calling. Now, before I go there, let me also mention another debate to you. Now, this is an argument or a discussion that I was having with a fellow editor of mine, a very reputed, brilliant editor who's worked with me for a long time also, and who said to me, look, I mean, we were also ruining the state of the media, you know, all of us, हम सब cry babies हैं, सब मीना कुमारी हैं, सब रोते हैं अपने अपने फेट के ऊपर कभी कभी. So the reason why we were crying was that there is no market for the truth in journalism. So my friend said that, look, there is no market for the truth in journalism, whereas there is a glorious, beautiful, highly successful market for the truth everywhere else. So now see, look at the whole vaccine business. You're not watching these vaccines come in. Now, anybody can say, I'm making this vaccine. My vaccine will be 100% correct, 200% correct. It means nothing. That vaccine research has to go through 3 levels of trial, has to go through many regulators, has to go through much peer review. The data, papers have to be published. Global media, global scientists, they all have to put that data through the ringer. When that comes out, and then when a bunch of researchers say that our vaccine has 95% efficacy, you take that as the truth and you put value to it. And that's why you see this Turkish couple which set up BioNTech. Their market cap was just a little over $4 billion the other day, and now it's somewhere near $27-28 billion. This has all happened within a week or two. Why? It hasn't happened because they hit a jackpot or a lottery. It's happened because what claims they had made so far, or what research they had done so far, has turned out to be the truth in that area. But my friend's argument was, and that is something we often fret about, that in journalism, truth does not get you the same value. But as I reflected on this, I realized also that I have an unconventional take on this as well. So many of you smart people have already subscribed to the print.in, although you don't have to, because we are not behind a paywall. We do promise you many additional subscriber benefits. Some are coming to you by way of our newsletters, etc. More will come, but that's in the future. And yet so many of you are showing confidence in us and in our journalism. Tells me that in fact, rather than be cynical, we should be encouraged and we should be reassured that there is a market for truth in journalism, and there is a market for good journalism which is non-hyphenated, left, right, front, behind, anywhere, which searches for the truth. Nobody finds the eternal truth except God Almighty or maybe Gautam Buddha. But in our quest as journalists, we try to find the best possible. And thank you very much. So many of you have acknowledged that. We just need many more of you. It's very expensive to run media organization, particularly if you are spending money on sending reporters out, on paying your contributors well, on bringing quality. So thank you very much for those of you, again, tens of thousands who have subscribed, but we need your numbers to go to lakhs, and I'm sure the way we are growing, we will get there sooner we imagine. So once again, on that note of reassurance, I am going back to my theme for today, which is RCEP, and you will also see how I am being unconventional in my take there as well. So first of all, just the basic data. As I keep saying to you, when a patient goes to a doctor, first thing a good doctor should do or a good hospital should do is check your blood pressure, temperature, get your blood report, maybe a chest x-ray these days in COVID times, just to get your basic data. So let me give you some basic data like that, because then we can work ahead. So first of all, where did these trade agreements came from? Essentially, all trade agreements are about reducing tariffs. Tariffs are taxes for what you are importing. So countries protect their industry or their production or their manufacture or their services by putting tariff walls. Now tariff can be 5%, it can be 300%. In our country, we've had history of having 300%, 330% tariffs like that. It didn't work for us. So essentially now, since the world has been globalizing, first of all, countries bilaterally started making these arrangements between themselves called free trade agreements. Then large groups of countries started this. You know, ASEAN happened, that is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Then NAFTA happened, that is North American Free Trade Association, and then others happened. So in this process, ideas for two big regional trade agreements came up, which are relevant to our region, where India is located. So the first was in 2005, something called TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, which then got renamed as more members came in, CPTPP, or Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. Then came the idea of RCEP, which is the subject today. RCEP's idea came up at the 2011 ASEAN Summit, where the 10 member states of ASEAN said that, look, there are other countries in the region with which we trade a lot. Why don't we bring them also in a free trade agreement with us? And that's how the idea of RCEP came up. In some ways, it might have been a counter to TPP as well. So when you look at the list of these countries, you will figure that many countries are actually members of both RCEP and CPTPP. Now, a big turnaround came up in 2008 in global thinking on globalization, because 2008 economic crisis came in, financial crisis came in and hit a lot of countries, and a lot of countries then started saying that maybe this much globalization is not a good thing, and then prophets of doom like Stiglitz and others rose and said, stop all this is bad. So from Stiglitz to Bernie Sanders in America on one side, that is on the American left, and to Donald Trump or American right, they all had the same view. So I keep saying this often enough, that bad ideas often find unanimity across ideological spectrums. So left and the right both love a bad idea. So TPP, for example, in America's case, it was launched by George W. Bush, who was a Republican president and who the American left hated, detested at that point. But after him, Obama in both his administrations not only continued on with TPP, but Hillary Clinton actually made it a central point or the centerpiece of her pivot, or her government's or Obama administration's pivot to Asia and Asia Pacific. So from Bush to Obama, it went on seamlessly. But then we know that other things happened in the world. By the time Trump came on the scene, Trump made it an election promise to withdraw from TPP. He said this was going to be completely destructive for America. He came into power and he did something of the kind that Indian politicians do. I will impose prohibition. So my first day as chief minister, I will impose prohibition. On my first day as chief minister, I will free all these prisoners. So his first full working day as president of America, what did he do? He withdrew America from Trans-Pacific Partnership. So as the Trans-Pacific Partnership ended, then China thought the Trans-Pacific Partnership was actually being put together to put China under pressure because there was a very strong strategic undertone to that. So the Chinese then thought that we should now push RCEP, which is a counter to TPP, and Americans have left this market open, so why don't we get in there? So RCEP started like that. India was very much a part of it. India walked out of the negotiations last year. Now what happens in these two? So generally we'll share the documents with you and you can read in detail, I know, because many of you want more details, especially those of you who are working on UPSC. So don't count on me for that, don't trust me for those details, please read up. But essentially, like all free trade agreements, these entail a reduction of duties or tariffs. So TPP, for example, and these are some essential differences. TPP actually is much more radical. TPP says that 90% of the products, services should go to zero duty in the course of time. Whereas RCEP says that 80% of the goods should keep on reducing duties until they go to almost zero or a very low level in 20 years, not immediately. Also, TPP has much stronger regulations or demands or standards on labor laws, environmental laws, obviously something that the Chinese don't like. So RCEP is more relaxed on those. Now how big these are, I will tell you, and this is what tells you also about the balance of economic power in the world. TPP accounts for 40% of the global GDP, but only 10% of the global population. So 10% population, 40% GDP. RCEP also accounts for 40% of the global GDP, but 50% of the world's population. So TPP actually includes people who are 5 times as rich as people of the 15th country is RCEP, and frankly, if India was a part of it, then the population percentage would be even higher. So this is how big these two are. Now there's much debate about how much benefit would RCEP have brought. Now, there's an article in The Economist which I'll share with you, which says actually that China does not benefit from it as much as people might have imagined it is, or certainly as we might have imagined in India that it does. On the other hand, some other countries like maybe Japan also benefit from it. The other thing that Economist article tells us is that 83% of all the trade that will between the countries in RCEP is already covered by foreign trade agreements between those countries. For example, India has a free trade agreement with ASEAN region. So it's not such a big deal. It just so happens that China is the biggest country there. But it's not as if China dominates it. But remember, because TPP, CPTPP had a strategic undertone to it, so by default are the others right to think that this might have a Chinese strategic undertone to it as well, because the captain of the team, the strongest, essentially is seen as the captain of the team, which is the case, which will be the case in RCEP. Now India has walked out of it. India has not said that India is walking out of it because of China, but India has said they are walking out of it because they don't think it's fair to them, and they think this kind of reduction of tariffs will further deindustrialize some manufacturing sectors in India. And this comes from a belief that the earlier reform, which lowered tariffs, has destroyed Indian manufacturing in some areas, and that has led to the growth of Chinese imports into Indian markets. Now, if you look at India's trade balance situation, India is a trade deficit country. Now, one reason for the trade deficit, the big reason is oil imports, because India imports so much of its oil and gas. So if you look at countries like say Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Iraq, Iran, when you can trade with it, when you can buy oil from it, India will have a big negative balance of trade with these countries. But look at some of the other countries. So India has its biggest negative balance of trade with China. At one point it had gone up to $70 billion a year. Now it has come down substantially, but it's come down not just because we Indians are importing less from China, it's also come down because India's economy is suffering right now, and Indian industry is not importing so much from China by way of machinery, goods, etc., etc. So this is not all a good news story that our trade deficit with China has narrowed. But if you look at just the last quarter for which we have data this year, that is April to September this year, then India-China trade deficit is 1,25,000 crore. This data is in rupees. At the same time, India has its biggest trade surplus with America, which is 77,000 crores in the same quarter. And it's with America that we are fighting this unresolvable issues over a tiny trade deal. So we are giving a hard time to a country with which we enjoy a huge surplus, and we are running away from a country with which we also suffer from a big trade deficit but don't seem to have an answer. And then there are other countries, there is UAE with which we have a negative balance. There is Hong Kong. You can treat this as an extension of China, particularly now as the Chinese government, Xi Jinping, has completely banished that distinction between Hong Kong and China. And then there are other countries that don't matter so much. If trade agreements were so bad, then all the wealth from some countries would have been transferred to some countries. On the other hand, if you see something like CPTPP and all the research that came up in global academia, it tells you that the countries that would have benefited from CPTPP would have been countries like Thailand, Vietnam, countries like that, because those are countries which have the advantage of cheaper labor and more efficient manufacture, something that India could benefit from also. But if India got it right. Now, there is a line that I will quote for you, and there is a little bit of a trick in what I am doing. This is a line from a document, and the trick is that I'm not just telling you what this document is. So hear me out, guess, and I will tell you where it comes from. So this is India's aspiration to become a $5 trillion economy depends critically on promoting pro-business policy that unleashes the power of competitive markets to generate wealth on the one hand, and weaning away from, quote unquote again, pro-crony policy that may favor specific private interests, especially powerful incumbents on the other hand. Now, who said this? I will tell you, but I will still take another minute now, and I'll carry on from this sentence. Now, next sentence is, economic events since 1991 provide powerful evidence supporting this crucial distinction. Viewed from the lens of stock market, which captures the pulse of the economy, creative destruction has increased significantly after reform in India's economy. And then it goes on to say that before the 1991 reform, the average age of a share on BSE Sensex was 60 years. So a company lasted 60 years once it had taken that position of preeminence. Now it's only 12 years. Good thing or a bad thing, you guess. But I will come to that. So now it's only 12 years. And then it goes on to say, the same document, every 5 years, 1/3 of the companies on BSE index are churned out, which means new firms, new products, new entrepreneurship, new technologies, new ideas are coming in. Now, in capitalism, creative destruction is essential, because if you don't have creative destruction, then everything will be BSNL. I deliberately use that example because you might say that is also destruction, but that is not creative destruction. So capitalism, free economy is all about competition. And unless you make your people compete, first of all, you make them compete amongst themselves, but also with the world. Because if they are not competing with the world, then they are competing with each other, essentially at the cost of you and I, the consumer and the taxpayer. That is why until 30 years back, we were lining up, we were waiting in waiting lists to buy a Premier Padmini car. Today, you have the world's best cars available to you. You can buy them. Salespeople will come and sell those to you. Also give you maybe a free air conditioner with it. So life has now changed for India's consumer. One, on pricing terms, and second, in quality terms as well. Because Indian industry was made to compete with the world after 1991. Now, for those who say 1991 destroyed India's industry of manufacturing, once again, I am picking up the thread from those two paras that I read to you, and I will let you know where those come from. And if you pick up the thread from those paras, because they use the stock market as an example, then I will run through the list. It's not comprehensive, it's not full, but an indicative list of companies which existed on the BSE stock exchange in 1991 and today either no longer exist on the BSE index or don't exist at all. And if I read out the names to you, these will sound like iconic companies but of the past, and iconic companies that died or that faded away simply because they could not compete with the newcomers who had better ideas, more energy, better technology. So here is my list. Ballarpur Industries, in fact the company has gone in for bankruptcy now. Hindustan Motors, remember the Ambassador cars, finished now, it's over, they sold their business to Peugeot and now they are finished. Indian Organics, Premier Automobiles, the Premier Padmini cars, where are they now? They sold their land, bankrupted in 2018, and then many others. Zenith Steel and Pipe, Bombay Dyeing, Seat Tires, Century Textiles, GSFC, Gujarat State Fertilizer Company, Indian Rayon, Mukund Iron Limited, Philips India, used to be Pico Electronics, Siemens. Now all of these have not gone away because they were shaken out by competition. Some have delisted, some are MNCs which delisted, like say Siemens for that matter. Voltas and Indian Hotels, Tata companies not shut down but off the index. They've lost their preeminence. GSK, the drug company, the pharma company. Grasim, big company owned by a big conglomerate, that is the Aditya Birla Group. Hindalco, again a big company owned by a big conglomerate, that is the Aditya Birla Group. So in this group you have the group of companies which dropped out. You have two at least from Aditya Birla Group and two from the Tata Group. So the best thing about competition in good capitalism is it's fair. It does not bother about reputation. So whether you are a Tata company, a Birla company, Government of India's company, if you are not performing or others are performing better than you, you will perish or you will fade. And that's what happened. See, on the other hand, while today you are crying, oh God, all these fine Indian companies died because of Manmohan Singh, Chidambaram, Narasimha Rao's reform in 1991. We had such fine companies. See what has come in. And these are companies that did not even exist in 1991 or at least did not exist as listed big companies. And as I read these companies' names, I will also read you their current market cap figures, generally rounded off. So HDFC now worth 4 lakh crores. HDFC Bank now worth 8 lakh crores, 8 trillion rupees. Axis Bank 2 lakh crores. Maruti 2 lakh crores. Tech Mahindra about 1 lakh of crores. And then I list the rest of the companies: State Bank of India, Kotak Mahindra Bank, Sun Pharma, ICICI Bank, Bajaj Finserv. See, Bajaj Finserv today is valued a lot more than Bajaj Auto. Bajaj Finservice today, 1,40,000 crores. Bajaj Auto is 90,000 crores. And Bajaj has another finance company which is 2,88,000 crores. That is Bajaj Finance. So once again, Rahul Bajaj was somebody who was then leading the Bombay Club and who wanted reform to be hastened slowly, because he thought that this was going to be very dangerous for India's native industry. But see, his companies have competed well. His companies have come up with innovative ideas, and how much more wealth have they built. So if you look at all these companies, and I'll go down: Bajaj Finserv, HCL Technologies, Bajaj Auto, Asian Paints, NTPC, ONGC, Power Grid, all three PSUs, Bajaj Finance, TCS. So you might rue the fact that Indian Hotels and Voltas have gone away from the index, but look at the value that TCS has brought in: 10 lakh crores worth, 10 trillion rupees. TCS, Infosys, never existed before. Ultratech Cement worth 1,40,000 crores. Bharti Airtel, 2,60,000 crores. IndusInd Bank, and even Titan Industries, which recently became a little bit controversial because of some of its advertising, that's worth 1,20,000 crores despite all the calls of boycotts, etc. In fact, if you look at just these companies, the new companies that have come up on the index post reform, the value of these, back of the envelope or top of my mind calculation, population is more than rupees 50 lakh crores. It's more than 50 trillion rupees. So once again, creative destruction of capitalism is a good thing. Some people lose out, but people who are inefficient, uncompetitive, do not have good ideas, do not know the market, do not respect the market, they get shaken out. And what else is capitalism all about? They must get shaken out. In fact, Indian businesses are today backing Modi government's, if I may say so, respectfully, completely misplaced ideas of bringing back protectionism, going away from these trade agreements, protecting their domestic industry from foreign competition, obviously at the cost of us consumers and taxpayers. It's a crime what we are going back to right now with some fancy idea of protecting domestic industry. India's domestic industry, on the other hand, was a victim of the Maa Ka Lallu syndrome until 1991. Maa Ka Lallu, you can call it Baap Ka Lallu, and Indian parent ka Lallu syndrome, right? Which is that don't let my kid go and fix a broken light bulb. Don't let my kid go and change a fuse. It's dangerous. Similarly, don't throw my kid into the water. Whereas anybody would tell you that unless somebody pushes you in the water, you do not learn to swim. And that equivalent of somebody pushing you in the water in capitalism is somebody exposing you to the chilly breeze of competition. Because then if you do well, that's when winners come out, and that's when global winners come out, and that's when you can export. You cannot export by protecting your domestic industry from imports, because why would anybody then buy from you? People will only import raw material from you. People will only import iron ore from you. That is not good for a country like India. So there is a chronic fear of exports which runs very deep in our Indian psyche. Very deep. And this is despite the fact that after 1991, India's exports, say with software, services, have really boomed. That is India's big success story. If we had not reformed, this would never have happened, and yet the fear of exports carries on. So I will tell you in conclusion a story that Mr. Abid Hussain, who was once India's Commerce Secretary, besides holding many other positions, including India's ambassador to the US, he was Commerce Secretary when VP Singh was Commerce Minister of India. So he had this brilliant story which he used to tell in his public speeches, that once VP Singh called him and said, Abid Saab, इस देश को एक स्लोगन देते हैं, लेट्स गिव द कंट्री अ स्लोगन, एक्सपोर्ट और पेरिश. सो ही सेड, आई टर्न अराउंड एंड आई सेड, सर, मिनिस्टर सर, don't give this country any such slogan. So he said, Mr. VP Singh asked me why. I said, because then this country may just decide to perish collectively because they are so afraid of exports. So don't be afraid of exports. And you can't have exports but no imports. If you say imports are bad, exports are good, then see you later, you can go back to being North Korea. Or you can go back to Indira Gandhi's days of license quota raj and controlled economy and tiny bits of growth here and there. And no, I haven't forgotten that I promised you that I will tell you where I had quoted those two paras from. Those paras talking about creative destruction, etc., and what reform meant for India and competition meant from India. Those two paras were the first two paras of the third chapter of the Government of India's economic survey this year, written by Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, our chief economic advisor. So this was from a Government of India document presented on the floor of National Parliament.